Edward Teach, more infamously remembered to history as Blackbeard, stands as one of the most notorious and feared pirates from the golden age of piracy. His very name striking terror and fear into the hearts of sailors, merchants, and other pirates alike. Born sometime around the year 16 AD, Blackbeard's life would be one filled with violence, plunder, and a relentless defiance against British naval authority. But despite Blackbeard's legendary reputation and the aura of invincibility that surrounded him, his life would come to an abrupt and bloody end in the year 1718 in a brutal and chaotic skirmish against a small force of British soldiers. As one would expect when dealing with the pirate as notorious and dangerous as Blackbeard, defeating him would be no small task, and it has been documented that he sustained over 20 wounds during this fatal encounter. But what were the exact circumstances leading up to Blackbeard's final battle? And how did such a feared and battle-hardened pirate find himself cornered and outnumbered in a desperate fight for survival? To answer these questions, we will examine the contemporary accounts of the event by Lieutenant Robert Maynard, the commander who killed Blackbeard in this decisive battle, and other primary historical sources which detail the final brutal moments of Blackbeard's life. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the death of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit. Blackbeard was one of the most infamous, wealthiest, and dangerous pirates from the golden age of piracy, and he would be at the peak of his power in 1717 when he would commandeer the powerful French slave ship Le Concorde off the coast of Martinique, converting it into his flagship, the legendary Queen Anne's Revenge. With this heavily armored vessel and a fleet of smaller pirate ships under his command, Blackbeard terrorized the American colonies and the Caribbean, gaining much wealth by holding these colonies to ransom. However, in the months leading up to his final battle, less than a year later, Blackbeard's power and authority would begin to diminish, as in June 1718 his prized flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, would run aground on a sandbar near North Carolina. With his flagship lost, Blackbeard would be forced to reduce the size of his crew, and by the time of his death on November 22, 1718, he would have only 20 loyal pirates under his command. These two factors of a reduced crew and no armored warship to command would have critical consequences for Blackbeard and his men, as the pirates had been anchored at Ocracoke Inlet since late October 1718, and their infamy and disregard for naval authorities had drawn the ire of Virginia's governor Alexander Spotswood, who viewed Blackbeard as a growing threat to colonial trade and security, and he was determined to rid the seas of this pirate menace once and for all. Spotswood understood that capturing or killing Blackbeard would be no easy feat, and therefore he needed to give the command of this mission to someone who was reliable and bold enough to see the task to fruition. And for this perilous role, he would choose Lieutenant Robert Maynard, an experienced and reliable naval officer who knew his way well around the local seas and colonies. Lieutenant Maynard would lead a small contingent of 60 British soldiers aboard 2 small sloops to hunt down Blackbeard and eliminate him. And on the evening of November 21, 1718, Maynard's ships approached the sloop of Blackbeard, who remained completely unaware of the impending attack, as he was too busy entertaining guests aboard his ship Adventure, where all the pirates were indulging themselves in food and copious amounts of alcohol. Taking advantage of the lack of sentries and perimeter security, Maynard was able to block in Blackbeard and cut off any chances of escape. As the first lights of dawn began to creep through the clouds, one of the most ferocious and bloody battles in the history of piracy would unfold. In the early hours of the morning, once Blackbeard would come out of his drunken stupor, he would realize that he had been cut off by the forces of Maynard, and with the wind against him, Blackbeard knew escape would not be possible unless he could blast his way past the 2 British sloops. Blackbeard would then order his men to unleash a devastating broadside of cannon fire, tearing through Maynard's ships and killing several of his men. But the naval officer had prepared for such an assault and ordered the majority of his crew to hide below deck as they waited for the adventure to close in for the kill. Thinking his enemies nearly defeated, Blackbeard led his pirates aboard Maynard's vessel with cutlass and pistol in hand. But to his surprise and shock, he realized it was a trap far too late, and he would be ambushed by Maynard's hidden men as they surged forward, locking into a brutal and desperate melee against the pirates. And in the ensuing chaos, it is stated that Blackbeard fought with unmatched ferocity, sustaining over 20 wounds, with at least 5 being from gunfire before he was at last defeated. The following is a modern translation of a direct report from Lieutenant Robert Maynard in 1718, where he goes into great detail of this final encounter between his forces and Blackbeard's pirates. I have put up the original quote from the report on screen now for those who would like to read it, but since not everyone is fluent in Old English, the passage from the report translates to, "I boarded Blackbeard's ship, but in the fight, 20 of my men were either killed or wounded. Right after that, Blackbeard and 10 of his men stormed my ship. However, the 12 strong men I had left fought bravely with their swords, killing every one of Blackbeard's attackers without losing a single man, though they were badly wounded and cut up. In total, I lost 8 men and had 18 wounded. We killed 12 of Blackbeard's crew, and Blackbeard himself was shot 5 times and suffered 20 deep cuts all over his body before he finally fell. I have cut off Blackbeard's head and placed it on the front of my ship to take it back to Virginia." So, a very vivid first-hand description of the events that would occur during this final encounter between Maynard and Blackbeard, which highlights the fact that Blackbeard did indeed have 20 wounds on his body before he was killed, reinforcing that Blackbeard was as fierce and brave as his legend would purport. So although this quote from the man who killed Blackbeard is probably our most accurate and plausible explanation as to how the infamous pirate was defeated, it is however not the most popular or well-known theory on how Blackbeard met his end. That theory comes to us from the historical text, A General History of the Pirates, written by Captain Charles Johnson, a pseudonym for an unknown pirate. This historical text states that when Blackbeard boarded the British sloop, Maynard was waiting on board for him with a few men, and that the two had an epic one-on-one sword duel as soon as they saw each other. And recognizing he could not defeat Blackbeard in hand-to-hand combat, Maynard would shoot Blackbeard in the body with a pistol, resulting in his death. This passage also highlights the fact that Blackbeard had over 20 wounds on his body before he passed, and that Lieutenant Maynard put Blackbeard's head on display as a warning to all pirates in Virginia. It is very evident this depiction of Blackbeard's final battle in A General History of the Pirates is definitely an embellishment, but it does highlight just how much of a reputation as a fierce warrior Blackbeard possessed even years after his death, and his reputation as history's most notorious pirate lives on even to this day. So I hope you found this video on the death of Blackbeard to be educational and engaging, and if you did enjoy it, please do like and share this video with others. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel Historical Exit so you can find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.